The Wren by Anne Enright is twice its title. The novel's very essence is perfectly captured in that allusion to the tiny brown bird. The fine creature with its petite round body and elegant legs and proudly upturned tail and sharp distinct call. This is a generational saga told in three parts revolving around three women, much like the wren's petite round body that curves around itself, so does the narrative, revolving around a poet who abandoned his wife because of her medical issues. His absence, instead of being what it is, an absence, a disappearance, a non-existence, ends up being the opposite. A noticeable gap, an imprint lasting upon generations, a cycle of trauma, so noticeably, so clearly one of anger, fear, anguish, dismay. Anne Enright concerns herself with this leaving and the impact that it has, which she herself describes it as left his daughter with no proper means to hate him. It robbed them of their right to mourn. The protagonist, without really being the protagonist, whose view we get only once, told from his point of view and not from the perspective of the people around him who he has impacted with his leaving, is a famous Irish poet, who never met his granddaughter, and yet we somehow see so much of him in his granddaughter. He reaches across to her with her words. Nell is a copy. She's restless, thoughtful, solitary. She lives a life of wondering, of seeking something without quite knowing what it is. She lives life afloat, the epitome of that 20-something who doesn't quite know what they're looking for and yet are eager for that special something, something that would distinguish their life from all the other lives in this passive existence. She wishes to forge a path of her choosing, a path of her own, not a room of one's own, but a world of one's own. And meanwhile, her mother yearns for her to stay and to not repeat the mistakes of her grandfather, of her family. Her mother yearns for her to break that cycle, the cycle that nobody else seemed to be able to. Do not repeat those same mistakes of abandonment, of false love, of cruelty, because her mother more than anyone knows of the false promises that lie behind those lines, of those words that show Phil's true nature, not as that colorful poet he presents himself to be, not as that minor Irish poet who somehow manages to impress and to allure everyone, but as he actually was, as a man with all the faults and the flaws of a man and of a human. Those lines of verse were often cruel, and Anne Enright carefully scatters those lines throughout the narrative, creating a lyrical accompaniment to the key events. The voices are somehow united and yet at once distinct. Nell exists in a haze of hard-to-read, dreamlike observations that at times seem to us senseless and yet only somehow make a tiny bit of sense towards the end, while her mother Carmel dwells on the past, on a bubble of pain that her father, the poet, left behind when he disappeared, or not quite disappeared. On a shattered and fragmented childhood split apart by her mother's illness, her father's leaving, his refusal to leave completely, and throughout it all, the Wren sings. The Wren sings with his poetry, his wishes, his feelings, as the women struggle to find and grasp at their own feelings and wishes. The novel is hard to get into. It starts as one thing, merges into another, ends as yet another. It impresses with its transformation, and from a literary point of view, certainly it merits appraisal. With its fascinating structure, its mirroring of a wren, its narrative style, I could talk for hours about how this novel is just like the bird. That little brown bird, the way the dialogue, so witty, so intense, and yet so distanced, seems quite like that quiet and yet at once powerful birdsong. The way the complex mother-daughter relationship, the way it tempts us and attracts us with its darkness, and yet moments of glittering hope that maybe at some point they will reunite. Is it not like the bird's eyes? Those orbs of darkness, those black beads, at once so astute and worrying and desperately beautiful and intensely compelling. What about the long, elegant legs of the little bird? And likewise those long stretches of time that Enright builds, as she allows herself to really focus on the family puzzle and to reveal it bit by bit, putting together one piece just to disassemble another, the way that disjointed narrative comes together and falls apart when the bird ruffles its feathers, when it moves in the wind and reveals one aspect of its body just to close off another. Likewise, that novel which at once reveals itself to us, the reader, and closes us away from it. That proud, upturned tale, the same proudness of the characters. Take, for example, the poet who is the cause of all this mess. The poet who's famous for his description of birds and of natural beauty and of the little fine elements of nature that we should love and appreciate. Well, what does he love and appreciate when he abandons his family, when he pretends to care? Or maybe he genuinely cares but just ceases to show it in a way that's adequate, in a way his family would understand. The irony of such long, lasting, enduring lines of love when his own love was not so lasting and enduring. Phil is a poet and a character who will divide. As a book club pick, I can foresee arguments and arguments upon arguments of, just like we might argue about the bird's coat, about its color. Are those feathers white? Are they brown? Are they pure? Are they off-white? Are they milk? What combination of colors are they? And just like the bird shifts and changes color in a new flash of sunlight, so too does the narrative shift and evolve, and the colors change with it, and the work we have started reading is not the work we finish reading. And yet the problem with wrens is that we can't quite observe them without disturbing them. And likewise, this is very much the problem with the work. From a literary view, it astounds with its beauty, it astounds with its complexity in construction. Its fine-tuned element, thinking about the bird's feathers, form, eyes, likewise the novel's structure, plot, themes, motifs, verse, prose, characters, and yet we can't quite get enough of the wren. We can't quite get enough of a sighting before the bird takes off into flight. And likewise, the novel metamorphoses without really giving us a chance to make friends with it, to have the bird come closer, or to have us appreciate the bird, if you will. At the end of the reading, you're left very much to wonder where exactly you got to. How much of the reading was truly comprehensive, truly enlightening? How much of the wren did you actually see? How much of that bird and not that idea of the bird did you actually have the chance to capture? How much of the wren did you enjoy rather than simply admire? The uncommon word choices are, although enchanting, although capturing, although captivating, although gripping, they truly are beautiful, are ultimately senseless at times because we never really get a chance to come close to the words, to really truly feel what they are there to represent. We're always forced to keep our distance because Enright goes for a lot in a short amount of time, and we are like the clumsy child who simply wants to come a little bit closer to the bird, and we take that stumbling step forward and startle it out of its nest and habitat, and it's gone and far away before we really have a chance to make friends or feel that we have truly seen the bird and understood it or sated our curiosity. To put aside the metaphor, something that the book never quite seemed to do, it was a lot to take in and not a lot of time and space to do it. I suppose you can argue that it mirrors the trauma and the way that trauma disturbs, disrupts, and is suddenly something else before you quite get a chance to make contact with it. But the reading experience, although so fascinating, although so abstract, was maybe not for me. It's not a plot-driven work. But if it's a character-driven work, there are simply not enough intimate moments for us to truly manage to connect with the characters, for us to feel at least that we have tried to make that connection. I'm not talking about agreeing with the characters, I'm not talking about understanding the characters, I'm talking about simply appreciating the characters, not simply as characters, but as people. Somehow that manages to fall flat. And the reason I say that is because no, it is not character development to have so many moments of tangled bedsheets and other intimacy, because that can be found in, well, frankly, it feels, Nell is a character that posts a lot on Instagram. And a lot of these moments, it feels like we are just that Instagram fan, that observer scrolling through her feed and making our own assumptions about who she is, because we are never really quite close enough to feel that our assumptions are not just assumptions, but information that she allows us to have to reveal ourselves to us. There's a moment in this book when when Carmel says that her sister uses information like currency, like money, and it feels like the information in this book is that exact currency, and we are somehow too broke from spending money on this book to afford actually getting that information. And yes, you can say, well, the story is not really about Nell, so why are you picking on Nell, this girl who's so much like her grandfather, the poet who she never knew? And I might say, yes, the story is not really about her. But then who is it about, and do we really get enough information about those others that the story is supposedly about? Yet we spend the most time with her as well. The astute reader will notice the similarities between Nell and her grandfather. The astute reader will pick and choose at the points of focus. But is it enough for us to enjoy this work, to truly love this work, beyond a simple appreciation of its imagery and style? It's frustrating to come away from a work you were supposed to love because it has all the elements that you normally love, but then somehow didn't. This is very much a work that I feel is dependent on mood, and perhaps this is simply not the correct mood to read it. Maybe what it really needs is that time that's winter on the cusp of spring. It also needs more consistency in the beauty of its prose, because although it's brilliant, it's not quite brilliant throughout, and the moments of dullness, when the work is so dependent on the appreciation of moments of brilliance, dampen the glory and the light and the shine of the former too much for us to be able to enjoy the finished product as a whole. Its saving factor seems to be that it is so slim that even those who enjoy it never get the chance to think about whether they would keep enjoying it if it dragged on for 200 more pages. Fans of this book will tell me, you didn't get it. Those who are not quite fans will respond to that and say, neither did you, because there was really not that much to get when there was so little space. And I find myself stuck in the middle of those two arguments, of thinking, maybe it's me, and no, it's not me, it is the book. I find myself not knowing quite what to make of this compilation of stream of consciousness, simply self-consciousness, thoughts, insights, random wishes, random desires, random moments of intimacy, random moments of distance. It's so much, it's so overwhelming, and yet at the same time so simultaneously underwhelming. There's not much I can say about this work really without broaching onto spoilers, and I try to keep this series spoiler-free to promote women's fiction, to talk about the Women's Prize, because yes, I'm back with this series finally, but if I were to summarize this review in one sentence and my thoughts on the book is, I would say this. The Wren is about the vibes. And the vibes are very much hard to catch. Just like it's hard to catch a spotting of a Wren with its amber status, it seems like you have seen it, it seems like you have heard about it, it seems like you constantly hear people talking about it, it seems like it should be everywhere, and yet somehow it's not. And likewise, this book seems like it should be just for you, and yet somehow it's not quite. But nevertheless, I'm very excited about the other works on the Women's Prize for Fiction this year. 2024, I'm back with this series. I hope you will enjoy it. I hope you will keep up with my reviews. I am struggling a little bit because I have so many video series that I have to get through, but I hope to stay consistent, so I hope you will join me on the journey. Thank you so much for watching this midweek sudden review. Surprise! And I will see you next week.